Good morning, everyone. How are we doing?
Good morning. Good. How about yourself?
Pretty good. Let me try and change my lighting here a little bit. Hold on one second. That's not really that much better, is it? But early morning is darker here these days. All right, how are we doing this Saturday? Everybody have a good week? Anybody? We're all quiet.
For me, it was good. I got an thing coming up on October 4th, so I'm trying to go out there and try to sell some tickets for the event. Is a panel event with contractors, focus on Hispanic contractors.
Oh, cool. Good deal.
So I won't be. I don't know if you'll be teaching that class, but I won't be on the October 4th class.
Okay, I think this might be. I think I have one more of the session. I see some people signing in. Make sure everybody does that in the chat real quick so we have a record of who's here. And today we're talking about submittals in the submittal process. And got to be honest with you, this is a bit of a challenging one. We got a 3-hour session here. It's a lot of time to talk about paperwork. So I'm hoping we can get this to branch out a little bit, maybe into some broader contract and project management questions and discussion. And some of this, we got some folks on here that have been focusing on residential primarily and not larger commercial or public works. So some of this may be new, may not feel pertinent to where you're at right now, but it's knowledge that we want to bring to the group as you look and hope to pursue larger projects and different types of work. So bear with me if I feel like I'm just throwing information out there. That's not my goal. I'd really, if you got questions or thoughts or see something you want to discuss further, I'll be showing a few examples from past work and from how to find some current information, stuff like that. So jump in as you see fit. Let's kick off a little bit by maybe checking in with everybody and see what their thoughts are so far of all the sessions and any ideas or questions or anything they'd like to touch on as we have time. Let's go through the list here. Edward, you got any feedback, any questions? What's new in your world? Can't hear you.
Oh, sorry about that.
There we are.
No,
Gotcha.
saying that no, it's been a really good class, really informative. I've learned a lot so far. I can't wait to learn about submittals because just recently I've delved into that a little bit with a contract that I just got recently. We have to start doing it and it's brand new to me. So I'm looking forward to learning about it.
Great. Well, I've got you on the mic there. Have you started reading specs and stuff, and you're trying to figure it out, or have you not even got that far? Where are you at in the process?
Yeah, really at the very beginning. Going through the specs right now, just this past week, and waiting for a response from a fabricator so that I can add it to the submittal.
Okay.
That's what stage I'm at right now.
Okay. What kind of project?
It's a structural steel project. We'll be doing structural steel fences and gates, things of that nature.
Okay.
Handrails, building a platform.
So are you the prime on this one and gathering stuff, or are you a sub?
Yeah, we are a sub.
Okay. A sub with subs and vendors.
Yes.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. Structural steel in particular is an area that there's generally drawings and shop drawings and product data and erection plans and stuff like that. So that's a common area where you get quite a bit of submittal work. Okay.
Yeah, 100%.
Thank you. Harold, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. So far, I really enjoyed the program, and just like Edwin said, I've definitely learned a lot going through the program. The previous sessions actually led to me creating more timesheets for the workers, that I employ, whatever. So for my contractors, and also like my cost sheets and whatnot. So it's really helped me with that. And I'm like slowly trying to move towards some commercial bids. So this is really important for me in terms of submittals and whatnot. So it just feels like every day I'm putting like a small piece to the complete puzzle together. So I'm definitely looking forward to this session.
Great. Any specific kind of projects that you're thinking about pursuing on the commercial side?
Yeah, really more so just like commercial space build out, like office build out. So we want to focus on. It's funny. Someone asked me this question last week. Can we do rough and finish carpentry? I said we can do both, but we really want to pursue only one on a project, not both. So we'll either do the rough and bid it, or we'll do the finish and bid it. But I wouldn't go after both on the same project.
Okay, cool. Vicky, how's your world these days?
Good morning. So in my world currently, currently I don't handle submittals as much as I did in my previous job. So previously I was working with the Department of Transportation of Chicago. I was working hand in hand with the RE, so I did have a fair share of accepting and denying a few submittals. So I kind of have a rough idea of that. But overall, I'm really enjoying the classes. It's been a while, so it's like a review session and kind of learning a little bit more of stuff that I just didn't get a whole lot of. So really enjoying it.
So that experience was on the owner side or the reviewing side for submittals?
No, I was on we were part of the resident engineers. So we were not the prime, so we were just like a consultant for the city.
Okay, but you weren't on wasn't on the contractor side. You were actually taking submittals reviewed by the contractor and participating in the review and the processing of those?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, great. So if you have any advice or tips or thoughts on that side of it, on how it's seen and that process, definitely jump in, because it's always good to understand both sides of the world, right?
Yeah, no problem.
Juan, what have you run into in your business?
Like everybody else, I really enjoyed the class. I think it's very informative. I was on the not-for-profit side, working for a membership contractor organization. So we did write grant proposals with city and state. We did hire subs for those contracts that we did receive. And at times assisting some of our members with reviewing the proposals. Oh no, not reviewing the proposal. Yeah, reviewing proposals and submitting proposals, stuff like that. On my end right now, so I submitted a couple of proposals for consulting work with a couple of my clients, helping them out with business development side, advocacy side for contractors. So that's kind of my take. And yeah, if it expands into beyond that, if we do get the contract, I will assist with any proposal, writing proposals and following up on that, and working along with those contracts.
Okay,
So that's very important to me.
cool. Good morning, Ty. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question.
Mainly, I'm just looking to kind of understand what you guys have touched on in your work in submittals on projects, as well as any feedback or thoughts or questions you have from the classes so far.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Like everyone else, I enjoy the class and learning a whole lot of stuff here now. We have submitted some bids and just waiting for some positive responses. That's pretty much where I'm at this point, and we are also looking at some new opportunities.
Okay, what's a new opportunity look like? What kind of work are you trying to grow into?
Some excavating and concrete opportunities.
Okay. Thank you. Cynthia?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
Um, Actually, this is my first time getting to the class. So I
Okay.
really don't have like a review, but I feel like it's going to be awesome. So I'm glad to be here.
Can you give a little introduction on what you do and what brought you here?
Sure, sure. My name is Cynthia Love. I'm an HVAC residential contractor,
Okay.
mostly residential, but I'm trying to get more into the commercial side of it to do like some build outs for commercial spaces.
Okay. And what are you hoping to gain out of being able to participate in this?
To get more insight about commercial, the process of commercial, the commercial industry, basically, in construction.
Okay, cool. Michael.
Morning.
Good morning.
Um, I'm just listening, as like everyone else. These classes have been awesome. There's a lot of, again, I'm kind of in the Cynthia's category for as a
Mhm.
residential HVAC contractor and trying to move into the commercial realm. But I'm also here in Texas, so I'm not in Illinois. I'm bidding on
Yeah.
stuff up there in Illinois. Maybe some, I'm I'm moving up there. I'm transplanting from here to there because of relevant and my mom's there. So I'm trying to find the market there. I've submitted a couple of bids with CTA and um, IDOT, and I'm waiting on a response from those guys.
Okay. So on the residential side, do you run into having to provide like product information or manuals or stuff to the owner for your work?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I do.
Yeah.
I've been, in some scenarios, and not so much, not in on the commercial. I've done some commercial work down here,
Mm-hmm.
but residential homeowners I do. But again, it's a now things are starting to open up, a little bit more where I can get access to a lot of the manuals and things that I need because of uh, the supply chain is getting better a
Right.
little bit over here for is HVAC supplies, um, things of that nature. But yes,
Okay. Cool. Mo, how are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. Good morning, everyone.
Good
Uh,
morning.
so I've definitely found the classes to be very helpful. Um, I've incorporated some of the things that I've learned, especially on the takeoff and sum sheet. That was maybe one of the last classes we did, as well as some of the lessons that we've learned from the earlier ones, and it helped me get my process moving quicker. Got a lot more templates and sheets now that I can use. As far as submittals go, I'm familiar with what they are. I've rarely used them. So like on the residential side, to my understanding, I was using them for getting more clarification on like design related items. Like for example, a set of stairs. Last year, I think it was last year, 2 years ago, we did a project and we said we were gonna do the stairs and he didn't design the stairs. So when we eventually got to the stair part, it was just chaotic and I lost a lot of money on that. But I after that I learned my lesson that every portion of the construction project needs to be designed and detailed and explained perfectly. Well, not perfectly, but as best as possible prior to starting. So now we use submittals for clarifying things like we're going to do like a custom eat-in kitchen. So we
Okay.
send it into what we were thinking the client wanted. It's not what they wanted. Bunch of back and forth, and then we eventually landed on something. So, but very elementary right now.
Well, it's unfortunate that you learned by going through a problem, but isn't that how we almost always learn on these things?
Unfortunately, yes.
We often fail once, but hopefully we get better in the end.
That's the goal.
Cool. Good morning, Maddie. I think you'll wrap it up for us for introductions.
Hi, everyone. This class has been awesome. I think both speakers did a marvelous job in presenting the things that are needed for construction on a level where those who was unfamiliar with these things are now exposed to it to be able to one, read blueprints better, two, understanding project management. And then also with my business, we're in the process, not so much rebranding, but building a better and stronger team where now my homes are more presented as full efficient, as well as a bigger team, a larger team that can bring more of a mass production.
Okay.
Also, with part of my business, I do project management. So I have a large team over in California. We're working with a large telecom company. We're getting in negotiation with that to get started. So hopefully that's become successful.
Sounds good. All right, let me get my screen share going. Thanks for the conversation there, folks. And again, this topic can be a little boring if we're not careful. So don't let me just drone away. Let's try and really work for conversation and questions as we go through this one. Well, I would much appreciate that. Let me get my presentation up. This is also the first time that I've done a presentation specific to submittals, only submittals. So I built a little bit new slide deck here. So any feedback or questions or thoughts on what I'm putting together is also much appreciated. Zoom is not my friend right now. All right. Okay. Can we see my slide deck?
Yes.
Cool. So kind of cover three major areas. One is what are they and why do they matter to you? Two is kind of an intro and description of what the process really is on a project. And we'll find that this is primarily catered to more commercial and public works because that's, I think, where submittals often have the highest impact to a project. But as Mo brought up on residential stuff, they're useful as well. And if we get into it, we'll touch on developing and managing them as well. Well, we already kind of did the let's talk, so we can dive right in here. So, in general, and for the purpose of this conversation here, most of what I'm talking about for submittals is actually once you've bid a project and won it and have been awarded. As some of you mentioned, there is a lot of submittals on the potentially what could be called submittals on the front end when you're bidding a project. You know, you have the bid documents, there's bid bonds, maybe a schedule that they want, insurance, proof of insurance, a variety of things that you submit to even get to the point of the project. And this is not really diving into those because what I want to kind of focus on here is the intent of submittals for construction, as well as the process to successfully execute on them. So when you're talking about what are they on a project, they can be documents, they can be a sample, a color sample, they could be a paver that you hand over to the owner to say, is this what you want? Shop drawings, but essentially what they are delivering information to the owner side of the project, either through their architect and engineer or to the owner directly, with the intent of providing them information on how you're going to build the project, how you're going to complete the contract. And so I categorize it into 3 different areas. You kind of have the pre-construction aspect, which is stuff to get into place before you can start work. We talked a lot about baseline schedules in my last session. That's a major one on larger projects. Insurance, that's generally proof that you have the insurance, have met the insurance requirements that you took on when you bid the job. Stuff like safety plans. Different states have different regulations, but a lot of them require an injury and illness prevention plan. Out in California, where it gets hot, there's heat illness prevention plans. If you're doing work vertically, fall protection, stuff like that. Quality control plans is often another big one. For structural steel, you got welding. We talked about bidding some new concrete work, stuff like that. Concrete's got quality control. So those plans kind of cover how you're going to approach ensuring that what you deliver meets the requirements and the standards for the industry, for both quality and quality in performance, as well as quality in appearance. And material information, we'll talk a lot about that, and shop drawings. So those are all stuff that you got to turn in and get reviewed and approved through the submittal process before you can really kick off your work. Then you have the in construction stuff. And there's a lot of submittals is a relatively big world. So these aren't going to cover everything. And also not every project is going to have all of these. So I'm trying to just give a broad idea of what you will run into and need to be thinking about. So during construction, you got stuff like mock-ups. They'll ask you to build, if you're doing a skyscraper, they'll ask you to build a mock-up of the cladding and do a water test to prove that your sealants are working, you know how to do the flashings and all that stuff to demonstrate that the design is actually going to function as they want it to. Concrete, if it's a stamped concrete, maybe they'll ask you to pour a sample in the field to look at color, look at texture, stuff like that. Schedule updates, you'll see schedules kind of cover all 3 categories here. Schedule updates are how's the progress going? We talked quite a bit about that in the past. It's just recording what you did, when you did it, how long it took. You'll find that those are frequently required on larger projects that have a schedule specification. Quality reports. So you developed a quality control plan. Now you have to report on what has happened as you've built the work. So that's test results for concrete pours. If you weld pipe and they want to x-ray the welds, we got weld reports, stuff like that. Inspection data is kind of in line with that. That can be proof that you called the building department and that their inspector showed up and signed off on your rough in for electrical before you can proceed to drywall, stuff like that. Progress payment applications. You want to get paid, right? A large project is going to have a spec that says in order to get paid every month or 2 weeks or whatever the cycle is, you need to turn in a stack of paperwork. Stuff like labor compliance, your schedule update, a lot of the stuff that's listed above can be required on projects for payment to be processed. And then you have your closeout. So you built the project, you're ready to turn it over to the owner. You're ready to get certificate of occupancy or whatever they may call that in your region. So you got to turn in your final drawings that show any changes, what reflect what you've built. You have your O&M manuals. You know, Michael, we briefly talked about that even on residential, when you wrap up a project on your working with the owner to close it out, you hand over the manual for the stuff you've installed, so they know how to maintain it, they know how to operate it, they know what the warranties are. Schedule, again, there's the record schedule. That's kind of an as-built schedule saying here's how the whole project went. Final payment acceptance, that can vary on the project. On large public works projects, you usually are required to, essentially they'll send you a final list of here's what we are paying you for on the project based on what you completed. You have an opportunity to review and accept it, to have your subcontractors and suppliers review and accept it, and then respond with any comments or accepting it. And if you don't respond, they'll consider that you are happy with that number. Finalized permit, a lot of times they won't close out a project until you can prove that you worked with whatever permit agency and they have signed off and said, yes, everything meets our requirements. It's a broad variety of stuff we can cover here. And to kind of give you an idea, let's see if this link works. Are you guys seeing a file folder now, or are you still seeing a presentation?
Presentation.
All right, let me. How about now?
File folder.
Okay. So this is an airport project I did years back, 2003, 2004. And just to give you an idea of how impactful and important submittals can be as you get into larger projects. Sorry, Mo, I see your question here. We'll come back to that. Don't let me forget. So on larger projects, submittals can be in really unbelievable amount of work. So this is just to give you an idea to get this project kicked off. I don't even know how many files there are here, but a couple dozen. These are all the plans and a few ongoing updates that were required on this airport project for us to start work. It was to excavate for a new building terminal. So the order of magnitude can be quite large. So these cover everything from pre-construction to updates, and there's probably a closeout here, and I'll just open a few to give you an idea of what what they look like. And these are just the Word documents that outline what is being submitted. All the backup paperwork, this is long before PDFs were that easy to manage, so I don't have access to that. So this is a LEED action plan. Has anybody are familiar with LEED building?
Yes.
Yeah. What's your familiarity with it?
Well, once again, getting back to my working with a construction company, just some of members did apply for some of the LEED program, buildings, especially City of Chicago was doing a lot of the schools, a lot of the police stations, LEED, and also I work with National Association. I can't remember, they just changed the name. That was doing training, try to get more people involved in that, try to understand about getting credits and lead certifications.
Yeah. Okay. So LEED was one of the first kind of green building initiatives. And that's kind of, I always looked at it as kind of funny because it's, they're advocating for efficient and environmentally friendly building practices, and you end up submitting, a stack of binders of paper 2 feet thick by the time you're done at the end of the project. Better now as digital documentation's improved, but so this project, we had to develop a plan. How are we going to comply with the requirements outlined in the specifications? And that's what this does right here. Right, it goes through each kind of section on how we as a contractor are going to comply, what we're going to use for recycled materials, where we're going to get it. They push for local stuff. So it kind of describes, it's all the details on how you get from, hey, contractor, you have to do this, to, okay, I'm the contractor, here's how I'm going to do that. And as the project went on, we had to submit updates on that one. So similar to schedules, right? Monthly schedule updates. You guys kind of see what I'm showing here well enough to read it, or at least get an idea of what it is? Is it zoomed in enough?
I can see it.
Yeah. So schedule updates, we talked about this a lot last week. This is a narrative saying, okay, I'm submitting you a CPM update with all these dates that are changed or reflect what I did, but what does that actually mean? So every month we had to sit down and write activity by activity. Here's what was done. Updates on a critical path, what activities were delayed, work that was done, what's going to happen in the future. So that's an in construction, in process submittal. What else do we got? Pre-construction stuff like soil management plan.
And you said that's a monthly report or a
That one was
weekly?
that one was monthly, so it's really it depends on the project requirements. What I'm aiming for in sharing this stuff is to demonstrate, as you pursue larger projects, what you need to keep in mind to be prepared for. So typically schedule updates are monthly. Sometimes they want weekly ones. As technology has changed with collaboration now, sometimes they've gone away because you can provide reports through project management systems that essentially build those narratives. So it really varies. Bottom line is you kind of got to read your spec and understand that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So, I mean, just through the past few courses, it's like a lot of work, even with software. Like,
Yep.
how does a small, like 1 or 2 man operation handle projects like these?
That is a fantastic question, and the answer is they work a lot and they work really hard. There's not. So there are folks like me that offer services, and I think maybe Juan does some of this, of recognizing, okay, you're the small growing contractor and there's all this work. You don't necessarily have the capacity to handle it or the knowledge, so you can go to consultants to say, hey, I just need a little bit of help on putting a bid together for this really big project. And you have to do the cost benefit of spending money on, it's kind of like staff augmentation. Instead of hiring somebody counting on the project, you could spend money in a short term to get help from the people who do this, who have a lot of experience doing this. And then once you get the job, then you really got to kind of consider, well, how am I going to do it how am I going to execute the work over the next year on this new big project that's the biggest I've ever done? So there's a staffing aspect to it. you've got a good point on the software that it doesn't. Software helps, but it doesn't necessarily eliminate the work. Software is not going to write this plan for you, right? So I really kind of encourage the 1 or 2 person companies for this kind of thing, to bite the bullet and invest in, for quality control plan. You have no idea what you're doing. Could you go do some research, figure out how to do it? Yes. But could you go spend a couple $100 and have a testing firm or a quality control firm capable of doing quality control write the plan and just be done with it? Generally, for me, I see it as worth the money, and then you can focus on making sure you know what needs to be submitted, what you're signing up for, and trying to figure out how to resource for that. So it's what I really sadly see too much is 2 things. One is smaller companies get scared away from work like this because they're intimidated by it, and rightly so. It can seem pretty, it can overfill your plate, right? And so, but it's also a hurdle that you have to come over or get over to get these projects, to get the revenue, to grow and to hire and staff. And the other thing I see is relatively often is we'll figure it out. And so you bid the job, you get the job, and then they ask for a soil management plan, and so you spend 10 minutes at midnight trying to write something that's you think is gonna comply. You're gonna send it in, you're gonna get it back, rejected, not to keep redoing it. So those are 2 scenarios that I often see. This is an area where if you don't consciously think about what's going to have to be done here, you're just going to create more work for yourself. So I don't think there's a magic answer, but that's kind of my thoughts overall.
Okay.
And
Because I was thinking about just kind of from a holistic standpoint. I guess you can go the route, and I'm speaking on a smaller company. If anyone has advice, I'm definitely all ears. But from a smaller company, like, is the first step to research the prime or research the project to make sure it's a good biddable project? Because you could spend thousands of dollars paying outside services to create these submittals and plans for you, and you don't get the job. And that'll drain a small company.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to figure out, like, chicken or egg, like what are the steps that a small company can take to protect themselves, but yet be competitive in the bid process?
Right. Well, so step back a little bit. There's 2 parts to that. When you talk about spending the money to do these submittals to get the job, most of these are after you have actually gotten the job. Right.
Okay.
But you do spend money to get to that point still, because there's labor associated with doing a bid response, right? There's estimating, there's site visits, there's bid bonds and security bonds that you got to pay for. There can even be there's just cost of being subscribed to a plan site to have access to submit it. Those dollars are not quite as big as the labor effort that you can have to expend on a large project like this example I'm showing. But you have to incorporate in the MO. I think this goes back to your question, which one of these are billable. So you have to incorporate the cost of doing this work in your bid. And that is often missed because if you're new to it, you don't understand it, right? So if you don't have a grasp of, I've got 4 hours a month of doing a schedule update. If you miss that in your bid and then they want a schedule update, you're either throwing money at somebody who would be busy doing other work that you had already allocated for them, or you're doing it yourself, just scrambling to do it, or you fail and don't get it done, and then you're delayed in getting payment because you don't have your update turned in. And Mo had asked the question, which one of these are billable? Can you elaborate on what you're asking right there?
Yeah. Sorry, give me one. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I'm using my my headphones and my phone on one of them. That's why I'm
Okay.
logged into two places.
Well, we can hear you.
But basically, kind of piggybacking off of what Harold was saying is that for like for a small company to be able to get to this point of being able to bid on these projects and bid accurately, we need to know what we're bidding on. And
Right.
if these are things that are like nuances in construction, it's going to catch us by surprise every time. So what I was trying to ask was that, are these things that we should just know being in the construction industry, or we learn by making mistakes? Or is this, or is there somewhere like in the set of plans or some kind of resource that we can use to know like what, if a project will require something or not?
Right.
Like maybe like a checklist of, hey, if your project has this, then you're going to need these types of forms at some point. Because otherwise, I mean, I don't normally, me personally, I act as the prime for most of my projects.
Right.
I don't really want or like to work under other general contractors. So it's been kind of tough getting into the commercial space for that. And that's the only thing I can think of that would be how
Yeah.
to learn it, I guess, is by going through it, making mistakes and having to pay for it.
Yeah. That's definitely a common way to learn it. What you guys are doing right now is being on the proactive side, right? And that's really what we're here for, is to help work through that stuff and answer those questions without uh, giving you the benefit of learning it without learning by mistake. And so with those questions, I'm going to jump around a little bit here. As an example of where you start when you're, let's talk about, I want to go find a new project or 10 new projects. You've got a growth goal and you're moving from Texas to Chicago. How do you find the projects? How do you select what to bid? And I'm going to try and keep that focused a little bit on the submittal aspect here, but it consider this. Sorry, I got a visitor behind me. Don't worry about that. Consider what I'm going to show you here. We're going to focus on submittals, but it applies to a lot of different things, right? Project management requirements, schedule requirements, kind of how do I walk through and figure it out? And this will focus on public works type stuff, which is similar to commercial. So this, trying to keep it an Illinois reference here. So this is the joint venture that's doing work at the airport for Department of Aviation. And this is one area where Suzanne's been highly involved in doing this kind of the sessions that you're participating in. And so we get this information to try and help small subs take that step, small contractors take that step to get to the next project. So what I'm getting at here is there's information to find for a lot of stuff on the bigger projects in particular that are multi-year, multi-billion-dollar, and have really high goals for diverse sub participation. There's places to find information on the front end before you get so far into it that you realize you're in over your head. So this is just saying, hey, we're going to have these projects coming out. Here's some bid opportunities. Here's information for you to decide if you can bid on it, what you want to bid. And they've got you guys are seeing this trade package, right? Are you guys seeing
Yes.
CDA? Okay.
Yeah.
So we don't need to go, there's a lot of pages here. We don't need to go through all of them, but it's an introduction to the work. This is looks like a really big. So this is a grading project. They want to do some detention basins. they've got basics of scope, right? So, Mo, if I'm you and I'm looking to go expand into the commercial construction world on, offices and kind of build outs and warehouses and stuff, I do a 30-second look here and I say, okay, there's nothing for me, and I move on. But who was getting into concrete? Ty said you want to get an excavation in concrete. I look at this and I say, oh, great, earthwork, concrete, utilities. Let's look at this further. So that's kind of my first gate is the scope going to align with where my business plan is trying to take me? And sometimes your business plan is, let's look for a project that sounds like I can do and pursue it. And so, Mo, you may decide, hey, I want to get into flagging. What's flagging? So you can decide, make that conscious decision to look further into this project. Then you go into, all right, they've given us basic information here. This looks like one snippet of the plans. And you ask yourself, do I understand what they're showing? Is that the kind of excavation work that I want to do? It is. Great. This just go ahead.
I'm sorry, did you pull this from the City of Chicago website?
This is from the AECOM, Hunt, Clayco, and BOA are a joint venture at one of the airports in Chicago. I forget which one. They're doing massive multi-billion-dollar, multi-year expansion.
O'Hare.
Yeah, O'Hare. And Suzanne's got great links for this kind of stuff that I can make sure she shares and makes available. But this is, she sent me the link to this, but it is public. It's something that if you know how to look for it, you can usually find it with some Google searches. They talk about alternates. That's usually just if they have the budget and more work they want to do. Basic, that's another trade package. So this is just a bunch of information on a variety of work that is going to be part of this bid. So this presentation. So this presentation is for a pre-bid conference, which is where the purpose of that is to kind of present information to potential bidders so they know what they would be pursuing and make the decision on if they want to or if they're qualified to pursue it. So they're going to talk about minority and women-owned business participation, how you would comply with that, right? They're going to talk about how to prepare your bid, post-award compliance requirements. This is where submittals will come into play. Okay, I've won the project. Immediately, you're probably going to have to submit proof of your certification. If you're using other subs, you're going to have to certify that you meet whatever percentages for participation, workforce commitments. You're going to have to prove that you've attempted to or did hire people from these neighborhoods. And so this is giving you an idea of your submittal workload, right? So when you get into the project specs and really understand what this is requiring as you bid it, you can say, man, I'm going to need an administrator that's going to spend 10 hours a week doing labor tracking, right? So you got that. This is where you can make those, learn the information to make those decisions and include that cost of work either in your bid or in your overheads for your company, which are also end up within your bid. They're telling you what software you're going to have to is going to be used on a project. You may not have to use all of it, but you need to be aware of what's going to be used because you're in some form going to be asked to participate in it. It may just be for a schedule. They may not ask you to update Primavera P6, but they're going to ask for information where somebody's going to update the schedule within Primavera P6. You may have to get some training done with some of your staff on eBuilder or Procore to be able to use it. All these little things go into the project management and administration aspect of larger projects like this. Now here we get an idea of what the submittal workload is just on general project submittals. You're going to have to get payment and performance bonds together. You're going to have to get your insurance together. You're going to have a site-specific safety plan. Okay, I need a safety plan. How do I bid that? Well, you go deep into specs to find what the requirements are. You decide if you're going to write one yourself, or if you're going to use one you already have, or if you're going to hire a safety consultant. You figure out that cost. That cost needs to go into your bid in order to be successful. Successful, not in winning the project, but if you win it, being successful and being profitable, not throwing money out the window because you didn't catch the fact that you need to do this kind of stuff. OSHA competent persons, that highlights that maybe you need to have some training for 10-hour OSHA classes, 30-hour OSHA classes. You're going to have to put together a quality control plan. Here's the schedules. So is what we're seeing here kind of may not answer all your questions, but highlight that this information is available to you as you choose what to bid. What kind of questions does seeing this raise for you guys and girls?
I think this is pretty thorough. But I would say if let's say that one of us had gotten the award from the city of Chicago and we were the ones that had to put this together, is there a way to know that we would need to communicate all of this to the subcontractors?
Yep. And you want to figure that out on the front end. So I don't have the bid documents for this project specific, but I did find one here.
Not sure if you're going to discuss building a team, but I believe in order to bid on an opportunity like that, you have to have a small team. That might be a little bit more to handle for a one-man show. I just hope you speak on
okay.
Developing a team of estimators, project managers, superintendents, all the key people or personnel that should be in place in order to win these kind of bids, because it's difficult to win a bid like that,
right.
Even with the city of Chicago with a one or two-man show. It's just not going to work out for you.
Yeah. Good point and question right there. It's only before I get into that spec, let me go back a little bit. Because the reality is, as the smallest contractors, you got the owner, right? Maybe partner. You have an admin / project manager person. You've got one or two field foremen or superintendents, or maybe just a lead carpenter, right? So you guys, we're not staffing up with 1,000 people, so that contractor is not going to go after this whole trade package. So it's two parts. One is building your team, but the other one is choosing work that your team is capable of pursuing. And it's always the growth comes from a stretch, right? So it's okay, I've got everybody in place to do all this, but I don't, right? So let's look at the concrete. So I've looked at this pre-con information, then I found the specs. I went to the pre-bid meeting and I found the concrete work, and I can do this. I know I can do it, but I don't know that I'm ready to deal with quality control. And there's quality control associated with the concrete because you read the specifications. That's, as you're bidding it, that's when you start thinking about, okay, how do I deal with that? Do options in that example are you can put it onto your concrete supplier. You can say, can you give me my price? I want my per cubic yard price for concrete to include you guys supplying a lab technician to do whatever requirements are defined in the specification, and here's a specification. So then you aren't punting on that work. You're actually getting the work done, but you're getting it done by people who are familiar with it, do it efficiently. And on this first project, it may cost you more because you're paying them to do it, but you can learn and then decide on the next project if you want to. Maybe you have a field superintendent that is capable of taking samples and delivering them to a lab, but they just need to know what they're doing. So the first project, you hire somebody else to do it. Second project, you are hiring somebody on your side to do it, or you're leveraging your new knowledge to hand it off to that team. So what I'm getting at there is you choose your project selection or the scope of a project kind of based on that team, and at the same time build your plan to expand it. And if you're going to be pursuing larger, when I say larger, I can't give a dollar value to that where you hit these thresholds, because it kind of depends on the market you're in, how much, some areas require a lot of paperwork. Some type of projects require certain certifications. So I can't really define that threshold, but you get to the point where public works has a large project management aspect. You're going to need somebody who can do the administrative side of that. They have large commercial stuff, maybe has less paperwork on it, but they are, if it's an office building, they're pushing to get it turned on and ready to occupy so they can switch their construction loan off and start getting rent. So they have a really, maybe more of a schedule intense requirement on that. You need your field superintendent that can manage subcontractors well, keep things moving, has eyes on everything, can respond to issues, and within the submittal world that we're talking about here, that can write a daily diary every day that then turns into a schedule update. Maybe they even do the schedule updates because they have that knowledge, and all you need to do is train them in the software for a few hours to do the update, and then you process it and turn it in. Hopefully those thoughts kind of lay out a path forward for that question. Does that make sense a little bit?
Somewhat,
Yeah.
but I think a lot of the individuals on here, just speaking for myself, I'm not huge, but I'm always looking to learn and improve. And I think some of us are probably looking for a basis on structuring the team. It can be a small team,
Right.
just to get you to that point. Okay, starting off with administrative, because you can't do everything yourself. You have administrative help. Maybe you have someone that does your estimating and bidding. Then you have a project manager. Then you have a superintendent, and you yourself can fit somewhere along there. Even if it's in the field as a part-time labor, just to figure out how this thing gonna roll for you. I think if you can create some type of branch of which direction our early construction company should be headed towards, that probably help a whole lot.
Okay. Yeah, let me note that down, because I think that some of the other classes that I know are a little bit more on the business management side, and they may cover that. But if not, I do. My next session is kind of on. We have plenty of time to talk about site management and stuff like that, and maybe I can expand specific to that if I'm not overlapping on with other presenters.
So, and I'm starting to kind of understand it in looking at, this example from the O'Hare project. So this would be the requirements from the prime to subcontractors. Is that correct?
Yeah, so these requirements in this pre-bid conference is catered towards both primes and subs. This is an overview of what the prime contract is going to involve, right? So there's not 25 million of earthwork. There's 25 million of all this stuff combined. And often the way these work is subs will subscribe to the various channels that get this information, or they'll go to public agency websites and look for the next bids that will say, here's our pre-bid meeting. And then you can go there and then you meet the primes that you may have never met that are going to bid the job, and you network within the meeting. The other way it happens is the prime will call you and say, hey, there's this project. If you guys are interested, come to the pre-bid meeting. Because a lot of times these are mandatory, even for subcontractors on larger projects. And so the prime may invite you because they see work, they know they want you to bid. And that's kind of where you start your contractor team building, is within this process of identifying. The prime's going to sit down and say, I need these 10 subs because I'm not going to do the work. How do we find them? And they hopefully find them through channels like this as well.
Right. So who's responsible for, I guess my question is, who's responsible for these requirements? Is it the prime and then the sub is responsible for like whatever the prime requires from the sub? I'm just trying to figure out.
Okay. So they talk like the contractual chain of events.
Yes,
Yeah.
like putting together the baseline schedule.
All right.
Together
Okay.
schedule,
Yeah.
like,
Cool. So just to kind of keep within the topic, let's run through how that can work with submittals. We're going to say we went to the pre-bid, we found this project, we're going to bid it, we found a prime, the prime won it, they're going to select us. Now what? So this is a different project, but it's also, I just looked up some Chicago area ones. So this is street improvements. And I don't know if I can find this real quick. Bear with me. I'm taking a different path than I thought I would be, but this is good. These are the questions that we want to be here to help with. All right. So public works specifications, they all look somewhat similar to this. And this is the start to your answer. Okay. The prime, who is the contractor, this says what you are responsible for. Says the work under this contract has not been completely segregated into divisions of work to be performed by trade or subcontractor. You, when they say you, that is the prime contractor, are responsible for all work. So they're saying, we're not telling you how to do it. You have to do it. And if it's subbed out, that's up to you. But you were responsible for managing those subcontractors. Hold on 1 minute as I scan through. Okay, so it's written a little funny. What this paragraph says is that the contractor, all rights and obligations under the contract are by and between the city and you. And so they're saying, they say, and you, this is written towards the contractor. So they're saying the prime is responsible for everything. It's saying there's no contract between the city and subcontractors. So they're clarifying that you're as a subcontractor, your contract's with the prime and not with the city. But this is most important, and it kind of answers your question at a high level, and this is what's most common. It says you must implement such measures as may be necessary to ensure your subcontractors are bound by all applicable provisions of the contract. So essentially that says prime contractor, you're going to go hire a concrete sub to do the concrete, that's fine. You need to issue them a subcontract that holds them to the same requirements we're holding you to. So it's called a pass through or a roll down, different terms for it. But all it really means is you as a sub are going to sign a subcontract that says, I agree with everything in this prime contract. And when it comes to deciding who's doing what portion of work, that's where your subcontract is going to define your scope. So let's talk, you said baseline schedule. When you are pricing the job, and you're looking at schedule requirements, and you're a sub, you're going to give a prime a bid. You want to ask them and say, I see there's a baseline schedule and a schedule update requirement in this specification. Let's see if this one has it. All right, so there's this CPM schedule specification. When you're bidding the job as a sub, hopefully you've read the specs enough to catch the section. So then you're going to ask the prime, what are you going to expect me to do for this schedule? And they are going to describe, well, we're going to take care of preparing the baseline. All we need to know from you is how many days work do you need? And what's your sequence? So if you're a concrete guy and you have 5 days of sidewalk, you say, well, I have 1 day layout, 2 days to form, 1 day to pour. And I can't start until you have done all the grading and prepared the base rock. And I'm excluding steel reinforcement. So you contractor need to have somebody else lined up for it. And that needs to be done before I can pour. So you negotiate with the prime at the beginning what the expectations are for you for schedule information. Then you also want to, in the example of there's required updates, you want to know in the front end while you're bidding it, how are you going to want updates? What information are you going to need? So these aren't really extensive conversations. They can be an email or quick phone call saying, I want to make sure I got my project management time right. How much work am I going to need to do to get you a schedule requirement? Whatever agreement you and the contractor have for that work doesn't change what the prime's going to have to submit to the city. So that's an example of determining as a small sub bidding part of the work of determining what you're going to be responsible for on the administrative side. Same process goes, the conversation should happen when it's related to quality control, safety plans and safety management. Some contracts require a full-time site supervisor, safety supervisor for every trade. You can negotiate with the prime to say, I'm only there for 5 days. Do I need to provide somebody specific to my trade? Or are you going to have somebody on site who can cover that? So you define your responsibility on the front end to try and minimize both your risk of having to scramble or spend money that you didn't plan on, and also to ensure that you know what your resource needs are. So that goes back to the team. If you need full-time site safety guy and the prime says you got to supply it for any time you're on site, now you got to figure out how you're going to resource that. Are you going to hire a consultant? Do you have a field superintendent that's qualified that could do it already? Are you as the owner going to go do it for the 3 days that you're on the project? What do you think about that information? Does that guide you down the path of establishing responsibility?
Yes. From my standpoint, I'm like 70% on it, but
Yeah.
it seems like as it goes kind of down line, it can potentially be less paperwork, I guess, as it goes
Yeah.
down line. So then breaking down into, let's say, a small contractor who's doing, work on, let's say, these projects, like a sub of a sub. So, for instance, if someone's doing, I don't know, paint, and they win it as a subcontractor to the prime, but then they'll sub the paint work out
Right.
with another company. So now you're a sub of a sub.
Yep.
But going back to it, now you're very dependent on the prime and the sub getting their paperwork into the proper authorities in time for you to get paid in time.
Yeah. So there's kind of the small fish or bottom of the totem pole scenario, right? You're low in the food chain.
Right.
I don't have magic solutions on how to avoid being in that spot. But one of the, I think, most important ones are, what am I trying to say? An area that I see roadblocks and failures is this is the painter not recognizing that there is a 150-page contract on this job. And even if they're only painting window trim on one window, if whatever form of contract they have with a sub who then has a contract with the prime, the reality is that everything in this hundreds of pages applies to every contractor on the project. Now, where the failure is they don't recognize that, and they don't understand that there is some risk associated with that. So if they haven't asked, okay, I'm the painter. If I didn't ask you what information do you need from me in order for me to show up and work, if I didn't ask you that, and I show up to paint my window trim and I have the Swiss coffee white when instead of they wanted the vanilla bean cream, whose problem is it?
It's mine.
If you're the painter, it's your problem because you didn't ask the question. If you're the sub that hired the painter, it's your problem because you didn't make sure that they knew to ask the question. Right. And if you're the prime, it's your problem because you hired a sub who didn't ask the sub for the right information, and your submittal log didn't say, make sure you get paint color from everybody, right? So it's everybody's problem, but the guy who's going to get yelled at first is that painter that shows up, and it's going to be, reality is it's going to be not the owner of the company, but his field person that showed up to just do that window driving between jobs, who's going to be like, I don't know, they just sent me with this color, right? And if you're on a job that's delayed and time critical and already has disputes on it, that one day can potentially cost you, $1,000 of liquidated damages, because in theory they could point to the finger to you saying you cost me a day because you didn't bring the right paint color. And so I guess the moral of that story is that no matter what level you are within the project, you need to at least understand not every complexity of the contract, because there's stuff in here that isn't going to apply to you. But you need to understand where to look for the things that can put you at risk.
So is it uncommon for like a third, I said just a third party sub, so a sub of a sub, to ask for the prime contract as well as the subcontract?
It is uncommon. I recommend doing it. And sometimes they'll say, well, why do you need that? Especially so if you're in the privately funded construction world, it's a little trickier because in that scenario, the owner may tell the prime you have to apply this contract to all your subs. But in private construction, it's private information, right? That contract, until there's a dispute and you're in court. In public works, what we're looking at right here, I just found I wanted to find a Chicago public works project. So I just Googled Chicago street improvement bid documents. So this is publicly available for anybody. So you can ask for it, they can say no, but you can say, all right, cool, I found it anyways. But it is the lower down the chain of contracts you get, the less frequent this is even really brought up. Partly because it does, when you use the painting a window trim example, it seems low risk, right? It seems like it's not worth anybody's time to go through this level of detail. But if you're expert in your trade, pursuing painting window trim, you should know that you got to get the color approved before you show up, regardless of what the contract says. You need to understand those common sense areas, and you need to recognize if you're assuming something and it is different than what a contract says that you've signed, that you're just creating risk for yourself because you didn't bother to spend the time to look through it.
Right. Like I'll take like Mo's example with stairs. If I'm a sub of a sub and those stairs are like the subcontractor has, wording a certain way in terms of how to build those stairs or a timeline on how to build those stairs, but it doesn't pass through to me. And, I missed that timeline or build them incorrectly based on wrong information from the sub. And had I been able to read the prime contract, I would have known that. Yeah.
Yeah. Mo, do you have anything to chime in on that scenario and what you've learned from it? Like, what do you do different to avoid that challenge you had? How do you avoid it on the front end and get ahead of it?
I'm sorry, I some of that.
Just back to your example of stairs and what you've learned from that project where you lost money because you didn't recognize or wasn't brought up that the design's not complete. Now you say you've got processes in place to help avoid that. When you are approaching a job, what measures do you take when negotiating the contract and also signing up subcontractors to avoid that problem in the future?
So, 1 second. So basically what we do now is I require an architect or at least some kind of drawings on every single project. I know a lot of people feel like it might not be necessary for like a smaller remodel, but I think it gives everybody clarity on where we need to go for everything. And then the other thing with that is it also opens up more avenues to be able to see. So instead of trying to keep everything in your head or using like a written scope, you can see where everything needs to go, and it gives you more opportunity to spot out things that might come up. So for anything that would require being broken down, and I see this mostly with like carpentry, and then also with tile. So like with the tile now, we get every single possible detail from the width of the grout lines to the orientation in drawing format. So this way there's no confusion on what needs to be done. but that's about as much as we've been able to do.
Have you found, so you're getting that information from your tile contractor, I would assume, in that example? Or I guess, so we ask the question differently. As a prime, what are you expecting of the tile contractor from participating in that development of the details? What do you ask of them versus what do you ask of an architect?
It's a good question. I don't really ask anything of the subcontractors. I just tell them what needs to be done so they can get me a good number for it.
Okay.
Not a good number, but an accurate number. When they submit their bids early on, if we're doing something like that, where I'm bringing them with me to look at a project and we're just sending in a proposal for it before doing any design, then I'll just have them include things that are placeholders, and then I try to have as much in my exclusions as possible. So in the event that if there's something that comes up, then we're kind of covered on that end. But in terms of the contractor, I would say unless they're providing the material, like we're doing contractor's choice for something, or if they have their own storefront, then I would have them bring it in. But as of right now, not really anything else.
Okay, so that you're setting it up that it says this is the exact tile that needs to be used, as opposed to we want 12 by 12 white tile, please submit product data or sample.
Yeah, I mean, because most of the work that I do is residential. If it's not residential and it's commercial, then it's only been, we're given the set of plans with all the specifications already written out.
Okay.
So we're able to, we don't really ever have to have that discussion.
Okay. That's a good highlight of a bit of the difference sometimes between the smaller private work and residential in particular to commercial or larger public works ones. When you run into public works projects, they're usually, see if I can find. Commercial and public projects, the submittal process, is kind of based on, and this comes from AIA, the American Institute of Architects documents and guidance. They say a submittal, the purpose is to demonstrate how the contractor proposes to conform to the information given and the design concept expressed in the contract documents for the portion of the work for which the contract documents require submittals. So they're asking you, how are you, we want, let's go back to Edward's work on structural steel. We want this fence built. Here's the layout showing where the fence goes. Here's where our gates are. And here's a concept of what we want it to look like. You, as a contractor, needs to submit shop drawings or fabrication drawings that show material gauge, anchorage details, gate motors for how gates are going to be opened. And so they want to see what you're going to put together to get to their end product. That's often the structure. It's not really design build, but it's the structure that drives the requirement for submittals of things like shop drawings, which show specific details, right? For how you're going to anchor to the concrete, for gate post versus how you're going to anchor the concrete for a corner post on a fence. And as the growing small contractor, when you are bidding a job, reviewing the contract and understanding what's going to have to happen there, we talked a lot about the administrative side. But when you're talking about the construction side, you've got to find out what you're going to have to include, what you're going to have to do yourself to comply with these submittals, or what you're going to have to pass on to your vendors. Just let me.
Hi, I just wanted to add something
Yeah.
additional to the public works. So City of Chicago requires a submittal for every single piece of material that is going to be installed. So for example, generally they're very strict on what materials are placed in general. Usually for example, if there's a line item that has to do with conduit or whatever it may be. The conduit itself needs to come from an authorized manufacturer. So the manufacturer already has to be authorized through CDOT. And when you're doing a submittal, you have to provide verification that the manufacturer is already approved by CDOT itself. And I know I had instances where contractors try to be shady and they would get the submittal approved and everything, but once you go into the field itself, they would be using a different type of conduit that wasn't approved. So I know additionally, I know that we also ask for all the submittals pre-construction. If one of the submittals is not approved, then we hold, even though you may have already completed the work on that item, we hold back payment until that submittal is approved. If it's not approved, then it's not paid for. So it's really important to also consider that when you're doing your kind of bids, if you match up two items together, for example, let's say if you do like conduit and wiring, if you do them together, if your conduit is not approved, then we also have to hold back payments on your wiring because it's one line item. We can't just separate the line items since you already bid it as one line item. So you also have to consider that it's a safer route for you to do two line items in conduit and wiring, or else like you kind of go a sort of tricky route.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed. And does anybody have questions on what Vicky was describing right there? She's
well, I did. I wanted to know, let's say you did have a submittal for conduit and wiring. Let's say that the conduit wasn't approved, but the wiring was. Would they make you redo the conduit? Would they make you redo it as far as like the work is concerned? Not necessarily speaking about the submit. I know you have to have a submittal approved, but would you have to redo that work?
So if you're saying that your conduit wasn't approved itself, it honestly depends as to why it wasn't approved. For example, let's say if your conduit wasn't approved because the vendor just the manufacturer wasn't an authorized manufacturer and you just placed the conduit before approval of submittal, then yes, we're good. They're gonna make you resubmit the submittal with an approved manufacturer, and you're gonna have to replace the whole conduit with the new conduit.
Oh, okay.
So that's why I'm saying it's easy. It's more helpful to you when you're bidding to do two line items to do separate line items for every single material, to prevent getting screwed over by the city itself.
That's really good advice.
Yeah.
Excellent advice.
Yeah.
Additionally, one more thing, sorry.
Go for it.
When doing public works, it's also very important for you to read the standard specification book, because the main contractor might tell you to do something one way, but then the specification book might tell you to do it a different way. And when the city sends in their inspectors, the city doesn't care what the main contractor told you to do. They're gonna go buy the book, and then you're gonna get screwed over.
That's another good point when you're bidding a project, and this is, we're talking about submittals a lot here, but it's for any work. If you're bidding on, well, it's not just public works, but it's most applicable to it. Agencies have standard specifications and plans. Does anybody not? Is it anybody not aware of that and not understand what we're saying on standard specifications versus project specifications? I think the residential folks may not be entirely familiar with that. Would you guys like me to kind of show what we're talking about for that?
I believe I understand it. I mean, I'm in residential, but I do believe I understand it. But if you can go into it, I mean, it wouldn't hurt.
Yeah, let me see. See if they reference them here. I'm not super familiar with Chicago stuff, so I'll think a little bit. All right, we're gonna go for California because I know California. The cities, states, railroads, counties, they have their standard plans and specifications are intended to make their construction on their world uniform. And this applies probably more often to civil type work, sidewalks and utilities, paving. But it does apply to commercial as well, to buildings. It's just a little less universal. So this is state of California standard specifications. Basically, maybe a simple way to look at it is the state of California could say, we want you to build 2 miles of road and give you a 1-page map that says 2 miles from point A to point B. And it's an asphalt road with a sidewalk on each side. And in theory, that's all the information they need to provide because they can say, build it per the standard specifications and details. So these are universal that are applicable to all work unless they are changed by the project specifications. The project specifications would be what we're looking at with the city of Chicago here. These are project specifications that may modify what the city of Chicago standards are. And what Vicky was saying is you may sign a contract with a general contractor who says put in conduit, put in plastic conduit. But the reality is the standard specifications might say that steel conduit is required in that scenario. And if you go put in plastic because the general contractor said do it and they were incorrect, you're going to end up in a battle with the general contractor when the inspector shows up and says, well, you have to tear that out and replace it with steel. So what Vicky's point is, you need to understand both, right? If you do a lot of work with one agency, you will become very familiar with their standard specifications. And I don't even know if they do cover administrative stuff. I don't know if they got submittals here. So here's a generic example. Under drains, these are perforated pipes that go underneath sidewalks and stuff to drain water. Unless it says something different in the contract drawings and contract specifications, you're expected to submit a certificate of compliance. That's basically saying that what I've installed meets the requirements that are defined right here. So if you're reviewing the bid documents for a project and you say, what am I going to have to submit? It may not actually say this for under drains, if that is a line of work on that project. But you need to know that there's a standard specification for the project that does require it. And all right, so what does that mean for how do I bid the project? It probably doesn't mean anything other than when you call your supplier and say, hey, I'm bidding this project, give me a price. And oh, by the way, I will need a certificate of compliance saying it meets Caltrans section 68-2. And they may say, well, I'm glad you told me that because my pipe that's guaranteed to meet that is 10 cents a foot. And my pipe that is the same, but I can't certify it because my manufacturer won't certify it, is 5 cents a foot. I was going to give you the 5 cents a foot price until you told me this, right? So to Vicky's point, the details particularly on materials for submittals are an area where contractors, both primes and subs, often get hung up because they didn't do their research. So you'll note a common theme here. A lot of the stuff comes back to understanding the contract, understanding the specifications. And here we are throwing another document in that you have to know. This is 1,338 pages. Right? Do you have to know every page of that to successfully bid and execute work, road work in California? No. But if you were a company that just does water lines and that's all you do, you probably should understand and review and become familiar with every page related to water lines, whether it's the pipe material, the backfill material, the pressure testing, to set yourself up to be successful as you expand into these projects. You're going to have to find the time and resources and knowledge to understand this stuff on the front end, because it also drives, from an estimating standpoint, it can affect material prices. It can affect how much money you have to spend on testing as you install stuff. It can affect schedules. Like if a pressure test takes a week and the contractor's asking you to submit a schedule for your work, you have to remember to include that week for a pressure test. It's a little bit intimidating, right? It's just pages and pages and thousands of words and requirements, and all you're doing is trying to win and bid and win the next job. But it's important to be able to understand this, because if you do bid the job and don't, you're putting yourself at risk of having to take that conduit out because your wire's good, but now you got to pull the wire out because conduit's bad. There's can be huge exposure on this kind of stuff. And the part of the purpose of submittals is you may have bid the job wrong, but the submittal process will at least help you construct it correctly, because you're going to submit to Vicky's example, conduit and wire. You're going to submit, I'm going to install this, and they're going to say, hold on, time out, your wire is good, but this conduit doesn't meet our spec. Revise and resubmit it. You're going to say, great, I'm glad we caught that. It's going to cost me another $500 to buy a different material, but that's cheaper than $5,000 to install it, tear it out, and do it again. So I don't know about you guys. I think it's time for a little break. We burned through quite a bit of time right there. So you want to come back at is it 11 o'clock your time? It's 9:40 here. I come back at 9:50, so in 9 minutes. Sound good?
Okay.
All right. Okay. Are we back? All right, so I was kind of thinking on what we covered, and we jumped around a lot. I think it's all good stuff. Great questions. I have a question for the group is after seeing the stuff I've showed you and talking about all these pages of specifications and challenges and stuff, who's intimidated by all that information? Raise your hand or speak up.
It's intimidating to me, but I figured that I'm not, in terms of commercial, my goal is not to be a prime anytime soon. And even a subcontractor, I think for me personally, I'm going to look at maybe just hopping on a subcontractor's project and building up from there.
Okay. Anybody else? Thoughts so far? I think I want to take a step back and kind of look at the overall process and stuff here to maybe bring it back down to a simpler level. But any other questions or concerns or thoughts that have come up so far?
Not for me, honestly. It's going pretty smoothly. What you showed is what you were showing us is basically, for the most part, what I've been starting on with the submittal process that I just started
Cool.
about a week and a half ago. And they have us using the Autodesk software. And it's pretty straightforward. I also am lucky enough to be able to have one of the prime, they put me in touch with a person that's helping me walk me through it a little
Okay.
bit to kind of help me out. So, but this is just great because it's explaining a lot of the little things that I didn't know about this process.
You bring up a good point on the prime helping you find support for this, especially when there's requirements related to diverse subcontractors and small contractor support, minority and women-owned businesses on projects. When there's targets for prime contractors to meet, they become very willing to help you, right? So they fund and support programs like this. Sometimes the larger contractors have built their own internal kind of subcontractor development programs. So don't be shy to say, hey guys, I know how to do this work. I can build exactly what you want. But I need help on figuring out how to get these shop drawings completed the way that you require it. The worst that can happen is they say, sorry, we don't have help, right? But the best that can happen is they should sure come into our office and sit down with our drafter one day. We'd be happy to show you how they do it. Or maybe even we can split the cost of a software license for you to get you started, stuff like that. So I'm glad to see you've got that support. I want to go back to like the overall process. We've talked about, you know, how do you plan for this? But how do you actually execute on it? And so it's pretty much a circular scenario where when I say owner, that can mean the public agency, can mean the owner of the building that's being built, can mean the developer, and oftentimes in the contract management aspect of it, that's going to be the architect or the engineer, whatever consultant they have that is managing, that is responsible for executing the design and implementation of the project. So don't get stuck when I say owner. When you get outside the residential world, don't get stuck on that being like, if it's Walgreens, yeah, Walgreens is, if you're building a Walgreens, they are the owner, but the context of here, you're going to be dealing with their construction manager or their architect or other consultant. But that entity is responsible for defining what submittals are required. And there's what we looked at, the two areas you're going to find that. One is in the standard specifications, if they exist, and the other is in the project specifications, which do exist because that's what you're bidding and building the work off of. Then your job as a contractor is to identify what those submittals are that are needed and prepare them and submit them based on the requirements they outline. Then the owner entity is going to review them and provide a response. And that response is either going to be, this is good and you can proceed, or it's going to be, there's a problem here and you can't, and you need to resubmit or it's rejected. So where does the owner define it? The project specifications. Now we've got the Chicago ones. If you look up submittals, there's this whole section: shop drawings, product data, records, and samples. All right, contractor, here's what you do. We looked at the project or the standard specifications for California, similar. For each item of work, here's what types of submittals are going to be required. If they want to be helpful and write their specs well, they're going to have more information on what details are required and how you submit them. So here is an example of they're describing what kind of cover sheet you have to have when you submit it. So this is all this information here. When you submit your crane lifting plan for structural steel, it's going to tell them that's what this is. It's for this project. It's for this specification section, which is important because you can find yourself having to submit the same submittal for multiple sections. The electrical conduit you install may be the same conduit that you're going to install for communications. You can submit it as one package possibly, but you need to reference both sections so they can review it in context of both sections of work. Now they're describing for shop drawings. Shop drawings are the details of, in Mo's example for a staircase, shop drawings can be, here's the details of stair dimensions, materials, railing type. This describes what you have to provide for this contract. They're telling you how many copies, one that they can copy, one reproducible transparency, and 6 opaque copies of shop drawings, 6 copies if it's product data, if it's some sample, if it's paver samples, they want 4 bricks. If you want to do something different than's required, you need to notify them in writing to get approval for it. So that, to me, that's an example of an informative submittal section that does give you all the details. That information will help you decide how much labor, administrative work you're going to have to put into preparing these things. And, stuff like, as you get into bigger projects, copies of plans are expensive, right? So if you got to submit 6 copies of 24 by 36 structural steel shop drawings, a couple $100 of paper, it adds up. So you want to make sure you have that covered in your bids. Some cases they will provide what's called the schedule of submittals, which is a list. I don't think this one has that. Let me see if I can find an example. Here's the contractor view of a submittal log or schedule of submittals. This was another pretty large project. So we broke it up into some, submittals that all contractors participate in, submittals that each individual sub has to provide. The intent of this is to describe what the submittal is. It's a tracking list, right? So schedule of submittals says, here's what the submittals are. Here's the specification section they reference. Here's the contractor that's responsible for it. Here's when we're going to turn it in. That at the beginning of a project, you often will be asked to turn in a schedule of submittals, which seems redundant, but it's see if I can find their spec here. So here they're asking for the project schedule to include a schedule of proposed submittal dates. That's because review time can impact schedule, right? Approval of materials before you can order. HVAC world, long lead times for new units. You want to get your schedule to reflect. I'm going to give you 30 days to review the submittal. Or the owner who gets 30 days, contractor needs a couple weeks ahead of time to prepare it. Maybe you can assume there's going to be one rejection or revision before you can order materials. All that stuff is important to the project schedule, so you got to consider that. So sometimes that list or schedule of submittals will be, sorry, I keep jumping around here, will be provided in the specifications, but often they require you as a contractor to create one. That can be a pretty onerous task on a large project for a prime. A good prime is going to do this, which is to say, okay, so Rosenden here is an electrical contractor. We took all the submittals required in the specs and filtered it down and said, here, guys, you owe us these 32 submittals. And use this to track their progress, to track what they've turned in. A good prime that you have a solid working relationship understands that the sub may not have the staff resources to do this on the front end. So that's assistance, right? That's where they're helping you be successful by saying, hey guys, here's what we know you have to submit. They're going to always say, but you have to make sure that you have read everything and know what you have to submit on your own. We may miss something, but it gives you that foundation to start getting the stuff together. And I always put the effort into highlighting the key stuff. Temporary power plans. So this was for relocating power in a phased construction thing, so it's temporary, but it says that the requirement was and must be stamped by a licensed engineer. So those are the details that I would pay attention to as a prime to communicate to my sub, because I don't want them to miss it and have to submit twice because they missed something that straightforward. So that's the first step, is the owner has gone through and defined all that. First step for the contractor, prime or sub, is to understand what's required. So for everybody, it's read the specs, know what if you're the GC, know what is required for you, know what is required for your subs, and be prepared to manage it. If you're the sub, know what's required specific to your work, as well as any other areas like the schedule or quality control that you may participate in on a partial basis. If they don't already have a schedule of submittals, you want to establish one, right? You want to have a template that you can use in every project to track your submittals. So whoever's responsible for them can easily access information on. I submitted it on October 1st. The contract said they were allowed 20 days review time. They're at day 21. I can put the owner on notice that they're late. That way I'm not responsible for the delay because they took 21 days instead of 20. The submittal log is key to being able to manage how your submittals interact with the overall project. Prepare and submit them. So this is the real work, right? Use your submittal log and the schedule of submittals to prioritize. You want to look at what you have to have done to start. Good examples of that are the safety plans, quality control plans, proof of business license, baseline schedule, what else? Phasing plans or site laydown plans, crane lift plans. You want to identify what work you have that has a long lead time. Right? If something takes a while to procure and you can't start procuring it until the submittal is approved, you want to get started on that as soon as you can. Or you want to start to speaking to the owner about the risk and the schedule and say, here's my submittal, but there's only one vendor of this material. There's only one material you specified. Can you give us approval to order it, even though you're still reviewing the submittal? Some specifications actually define how much time the owner is allowed to review a submittal. 30 days is a common number. So you want to look at those. If it's something that is early in the project but requires 30 days of review, you may want to submit it sooner than something that doesn't have that requirement for 30 days. And as you become more familiar with your work and with different owners, you'll find that you often find like quality control plans are one where there's almost always two submissions, right? There's a lot of submittals that routinely get kicked back at least once. So you want to be prepared for that timeline. As a prime, you want to communicate with your subs on what their expectations are and the requirements for them to both schedule wise, quality wise, what you need to have from them in order to meet the submittal requirements. As a sub, you want to be prepared to assign responsibility to your staff to get those done. And kind of one of the most important things is pay attention to the details, whether it's something you're preparing or something that another entity or supplier or vendor has prepared. You want to make sure it meets the requirements for two things. You definitely want to make sure for products that in fabrication drawings and stuff that it meets requirements for what is called out of the contract to install or build. But you also want to go back to the details, right? Such as this submittal identification that has to be on every submittal. Don't forget the contract number, because a harsh owner is gonna, or architect's gonna say submittals rejected immediately because you didn't put the contract number on it. So the details really, really matter on this stuff. You don't, if you put the wrong specification section on it and may get approved for that specification, like in my conduit example, they may approve it for electrical, but you meant to submit it for communications. Seems weird because yeah, it'd be the same conduit either way, same requirement, but simply because the paperwork said the wrong thing, they could contractually say, well, you're not approved to install that here. You need to do a submittal for the right specification section. And you're going to say, really? That seems ridiculous, but that's the nature of the public works in particular, but also some of the commercial stuff is contracts to contract, and you can be held to it even when it seems onerous and unreasonable. This, and we've got the overall process here. I do suggest as you get into more, when you get into more work that require this stuff, you want to develop your system to make sure this stuff happens efficiently, and try and minimize the time you have to spend on it. So if all of your projects require a certain chunk of submittals, build templates, right? Safety plans are a good one that you have a template of. Lifting and rigging plans. The template may be modified for each job, but it saves you 90% of the work to have the basics already there, and then you fine tune it specific to the job that you're on. If you do a lot of shop drawings and you are using your own staff to do it, make sure you've got a review and quality control process on that so that they only have to get done once. There's a lot of little things that you can automate. I don't think is the right word, but make efficient by standardizing it. The review process, from a contractor standpoint, you had nothing to do but wait. Right? The owner or owner's representative is going to take your submittal. They're going to say, all right, here's a excavation and shoring plan. I need our civil engineer to look at it to make sure that their shoring calculations are good. I need my safety manager to look at it to make sure it meets OSHA requirements. They're going to divide up their responsibility for the review. What matters to you is that they uphold their end of the bargain, right? So if the contract says they've got 30 days to review it, then they've got 30 days. And if they take longer than that, the contract's going to give you a path to approach them and say, you guys are delaying me. And you can protect your rights to prove that delay is their fault, not yours, if you follow the contractor's procedures on the notices and communication on that. So you built the submittal, you turned it in, the owners reviewed it, they kicked it back to you. What does that mean? There's a variety of different wording you will see, but it's generally in a form of, we're okay with it, you can proceed. We're okay with it, you can proceed, but make these changes prior to proceeding. You need to make these changes and submit it before you can proceed, or we reject it completely. So there's a lot of different ways to say those words, but those are kind of the categories. My big paragraph on what approved means comes from the Construction Standard Institute. So it's an engineering institute. I don't think you guys need to go to this website and dig into it unless you geek out on construction stuff like I do sometimes, but I wanted to kind of show that the engineer's view of it. So when it's related to stuff that has actually engineered aspects to it, like steel framing, a rebar for concrete, sizing for electrical devices, stuff like that. Approved means that whoever's approved it agrees that what you're submitting meets standards and meets contract requirements and is consistent with contract documents as well as what they intended for the project. But basically means, guys, this looks good. You can proceed with no changes. Approved as noted, you'll see a lot where it's, they might say, if it's an electrical conduit and fitting submittal, they may say, we approve everything except for this particular elbow fitting. Please procure this one instead, but go ahead and proceed. You don't need to resubmit it. That's kind of a time savings and efficiency manner where they're saying it's very close, but you do need to make some changes before you proceed or when you proceed. And if you don't, you as a contractor are going to be liable for any problems. So if you continue to order the fitting they don't like, they have the right to say, take that out, replace it with the one that we told you to modify to. Revise and resubmit basically means it's a good start, but not good enough, right? So either it's missing information, dimensions are wrong, this is the wrong kind of material, but the layout's correct. Stuff that isn't close enough for them to say we're okay with it. There's a few changes, but go ahead and proceed. So that means don't proceed until you revised it, submitted it to us again, and received an approved response. And rejected is like, sorry guys, nice try, but it's not even close, right? And that is basically it's as simple as it sounds. Rejected. They may not even review it, right? They might say, you submitted, it happens. You send them the wrong email, right? It's like, sorry guys, this isn't for our project. Rejected. So there's a variety of different reasons, but bottom line is you need to try again. And if you get something rejected and it's from a subcontractor or a vendor, you may want to consider when you communicate to them, hey guys, if we have to keep going through this process and there's a delay or cost impact, it's going to be your problem because you can't get your paperwork together. And what do you do if it is rejected? And how do you respond? So usually when they respond, I don't think I have a sample of it. I do not. There'll be some kind of stamp, sometimes literally like a stamp with red ink with handwritten notes on it. But they're going to give you a reason for rejection or for not being approved and tell you what needs to be done. So you want to take a look at all those comments and notes, understand what they are, and figure out what you have to do next. If you don't understand the comments, do not be shy to say, hey, I don't get this. In my view, this thing is compliant and here's why. Can I sit down with the person that's reviewed it and understand what their issue is so we can get it resolved? And if you have other people, other subs or vendors giving you submittals, again, make sure they're responsible for being compliant with it. Questions overall on this process? I think most folks on the call here will tend to fall in they're a sub or a sub to a sub area. So you are really kind of in the identify and prepare scenario just specific to a small portion of work. But it's important to understand that process so you know where the roads that the project can take with it. All right. I talked a lot right there. Somebody else gets a turn. Who has a question or feedback or thought on what we just went through? Nobody? Cynthia, can I put the spotlight on you for a second? As being new to this, is this bearing you and new stuff, or you have questions related to what we've just covered? You there, Cynthia? You on mute? Okay, how about Michael? Haven't heard too much from you today.
I'm sorry. I didn't say much, but ask the question again.
I just I threw a lot of information at you guys in the last 30 minutes there on that process. Just wanted to see if it raised any questions or.
Well, it raised a lot of questions, but actually, I'm just a lot of this stuff is I'm not into the commercial realm of this stuff that we're going through. So it's a lot of this is new for me. Um, that I'm seeing, not new, but I mean, I haven't been major projects like this with the city here in Dallas or the one there in Chicago, but I've had some exposure to a lot of this before. But yeah, it raises a lot of questions, but nothing where I'm dismayed or anything like that. It's just that if the process is different and on each project, sometimes some of the local projects over here we don't have to go through the detail that you're showing here, but it's all it's all in the project. So
yeah, that's a good point. All projects are different, so it comes back to that understanding what you're bidding, understanding what the contract and the requirements say, and knowing
one of the things that I've been noticing that we've been talking about when you talk about the subs, and there was a question that you asked about, or someone asked a question about if you do some of the wrong things on a spec, or I think you're talking about the tile contractor. But when you do your briefing with your contractors, when you're I would say the sub, but if you hire a sub and he's working for you, in the debriefing, a lot of the detailed things that are supposed to go down in the contract is discussed at that point, and you kind of can hold that subcontractor responsible for if there's any mishaps or defaults, or not defaults, but mismanufactured in the process. When I say if he doesn't apply the tile right, or he doesn't make the lines with the right amount of spacing, that's something that falls totally on that subcontractor. He's responsible for correcting. Isn't that not correct? If he's been debriefed properly?
Yeah, it's not only briefed properly, but that you have a contract with them that places that responsibility on them. And and also, contract law is a whole different deep world, but there are scenarios where having a meeting with them and describing that, and having notes that you had that meeting and described it, or better yet, an email or communication with them, that becomes kind of a verbal contract or part of the contract document. Can become. I'm not a contract lawyer, so don't say Zach said.
Well, if there's a mishap in the actual work, performing of the work with a sub, and there's dollars that have been already been allocated for that particular process.
Yeah.
So any mishaps or repeats or redos that should
it should fall
squarely on.
And that's actually.
But anyway, no, I've been listening. I'm just sitting back, not responding a whole lot because a lot of this is really new.
Yeah, that's fine. I prefer to talk with people instead of just sit here and throw stuff out at you guys. So I appreciate the interaction. And this slide right here is kind of on that. Using the tile example, if the plans call out quarter-inch grout joints. But also the contract says you just need to submit tile layout, right? So maybe the pattern is up to the contractor's choice or something. And if they submit a tile layout shows 1/8-inch joints, and the submittal comes back as review or as approved, that approval doesn't necessarily change the contract requirements for 1/4-inch joints. So even though everybody thought they're on the same page, you got a tile guy that says, well, I told you I was going to do 1/8-inch. You have an architect or engineer who said, well, I just approved the layout. I didn't approve any change to the grout joint spacing. I approved the pattern that you're installing it in. And then you have the prime that's in the middle of that, right? Because that the prime is expected to manage their subcontractors, but also pass on the responsibility them to do the work correctly. So that's a good example of where the understanding that submittals don't change what the contract says you have to build can dictate your approach to making sure that any changes that are shown in the submittals are also followed up with contract change. So if in that
At that level, when you submittals, this goes back to something you mentioned in the prior meeting we had. If there's an engineer change orders, if there's changes, so you get to a process. This has been laid out. The project has been laid out. The documents are there, and then there's a change order that comes down.
right.
That's going to affect. It's going to affect a couple of things. Probably the cost of the work that's being done. If anything had been already done, it's going to change that. But if there's a change order that's been in place, like an update to the addendum or something like that, how soon will before the submittals, before you do all this stuff, how soon you got to notify everybody involved of the change?
I mean,
Because you were just talking about the spec lines and others in the tile. To me, that's talking about the specs in the project. So if there's a change to that, that's going to come down from, I guess, from the city or whoever is that's in charge of this. But
what's the timeline for that? Is that what you're asking?
yes,
Yeah. Well, kind of a complex question. As the prime contractor, if there's a change, two things. If there's a change specific to a subcontractor's work, the prime should pass that notification on as soon as they have a documented change order, or direction to proceed with the change, with the change order coming. They should pass that along as soon as possible to make sure work doesn't get done per the original designer requirements. But they should also essentially pass on any change order that may not directly affect the scope of work for a subcontractor, but does affect the contract. For example, if there's a large change that gives the project another year to get done, and tile, we'll stick to that example. Tile's done at the end of a project, towards the end of the project. Say there was a major change to the building design, so it's going to take a year longer to build. Instead of the tile guy going to 2023, he's going to 2024. And say tile prices double, right, between those two. Technically, the change order doesn't affect the tile guy's work, but if he doesn't know about it, he has no recourse to say, hold on, guys, this change has affected me because my tile costs twice as much. So in both scenarios, a contractor it has, I guess, a business ethics obligation to notify subs as soon as the change takes place. The reality is that doesn't always happen. I don't know if that answers. I don't know if that answers your question. There's no. I can't refer to a standard that says, if there's a change order, a prime contractor is required to notify a sub within so many days or something along those lines. But the bottom line is they should notify you in time to make sure that you can respond to the change in whatever fashion
Right.
is required.
Okay.
In my tile example, kind of the opposite scenario may be to, the specs called out 1/4 inch, the contractor submitted 1/8 inch, installed 1/8 inch, and the architect says, hold on, it was supposed to be 1/4. The opposite could be the architect designed the job for 1/4. They issued a change to take it down to 1/8 inch, and for whatever reason, that didn't make it to the tile contractor because the contractor didn't send it to him. Tile guy goes in, submits and installs for 1/4 inch, and nobody says anything until the 1/8 inch. They notice that the spacing isn't right. In that scenario, it's generally going to be the prime's fault for not communicating the change, but that's always going to be a battle, right? The prime's ever going to say, well, you were at the meeting, Mr. Tile contractor, and you heard him. Tile guy can say, well, you never sent me a paper changing any specifications. So the documentation trail is really key. And for subs to manage that risk, you want to have good communication on a regular basis, especially when you're getting up to your work. Say, call the prime and say, hey, I'm going to show up next week. Just want to confirm, right? This is what we're doing. This submittal still good. This product's still correct, right? There's no changes to the work. Just to make sure, it's one last check before your crew shows up to try and head off those problems. Should it be your responsibility to ask those questions? I don't feel it should be. A good prime should already be ahead of the game, but the reality is it just is one more safety factor for you. Good questions. Thank you. What else have we got here? Risk with the submittal process. I think I've pretty well touched on most of this. If you don't get your submittals in and approved and back to you, they can delay the project start. I didn't touch on this. Some contracts will essentially say, contractor, you're allowed two review cycles or 3 review cycles for a submittal, and after that, you're responsible for paying for our review time. I've seen that happen on challenging projects more than once, where there's a battle over, when owners hire consultants to do submittal processing. So when they hire an engineer and he's responsible for reviewing and approving submittals, if he says, okay, here's my price, just like you as a contractor, he's going to say, I'm assuming 2 review cycles for each submittal. When you're in the 3rd or 4th one, now you're asking him to do something for free. He's going to say, no, my bid was for 2. Owner, you have to pay me. And the owner is going to try and say, well, contractor, you have to pay me because I'm incurring this cost because you can't get your submittals correct. So there's some risk there. Long lead materials in particular, there's risk in if you don't have approval, then you can't order it. You got delays to the project. This happens with stuff that is related to steel mill production runs are a good example. They might set up to produce a certain type of steel for 2 months, and once that's done, it's another 6 months till they make that run again. So there's windows you have to hit. Delays in getting paid. A lot of times, stuff like baseline schedules have contractual requirements saying if we're not going to pay you until your baseline's approved. Monthly progress payments. If you don't have your labor compliance documents in or your quality control reports, there can be a variety of things that they specify, but there's usually a checklist saying every month, if you want to get paid, you got to submit these documents, and we won't cut you a check until you do submit them. So there's risk of slow payment there. If you don't manage a submittal process well and basically stumble at it, if you submit stuff that's not right because you didn't review it, or you don't manage your subs properly to make sure they're getting the right information in. That schedule and cost liability can fall on you pretty quickly as a prime. As a sub, it can fall on you as well if you stumble and if the prime lays out what you need to do and you don't do it, there's liability there if there's delays or cost impacts. And if the prime doesn't lay it out, but you don't ask, that liability is still there. So communication with the prime on what's expected or required for submittals is, when you kick off the project, is really, really key. And that's when you bid the project, it's just as critical, because that's going to give you guidance on what you are going to need to be prepared to do. Yeah. Oh, so we've talked about safety plans and quality plans. A lot of times those are done by consultants. I think I have an example of this here. The risk with using consultants or other people to prepare work for you is, if you don't read all of it, you can get signed up for something that you didn't want to do because it's included in the plan. So this is what's called a lead compliance plan, which is to handle dirt that has lead in it. It's a requirement. So this was a plan, the contract said needs to be submitted. It needs to meet certain requirements. So most contractors aren't expert in that, so they're going to go find a consultant. And this was, I don't know if it was their first attempt at it, but it was an attempt that you can see my notes and comments on reviewing it that I clearly found issues with. Basic stuff like they've got the wrong city on it. And so if I submit this plan with the wrong city, the owner has the ability and right to very easily reject it and just make me go through the submittal process again. So these little details really, really can matter on submittals. Pretty basic stuff. This was the vendor needed information that we didn't provide them. These comments are specific to how we're proposing to do the work. So if you don't take the time to review this, you submit a lead compliance plan, you're going to move the dirt that's contaminated with lead. Here's how you're going to do it. But you say you're using one kind of equipment, and you go do the work and you change what you're going to use. The owner or other responsible person that is involved in the project from the owner's standpoint can say, hold on, guys, you can't use an excavator. And you're going to say, why not? Say, well, your lead compliance plan only said scrapers. Or you can't use that kind of dump truck because this one, the bottom dump reduces the dust compared to the end dump. If you don't have it correct to reflect what you're going to do in the project, you're exposing yourself to risk of having to resubmit the plan or redo work or stop the work. So again, details matter. If you're having somebody else do work, or not do work, somebody's developing a drawing or a plan or information that's going to tell somebody else how you're doing your work, make sure you agree with it. Don't trust the experts just because they're experts. See if there's any other big ones here. Yeah, it's all similar comments here, but I think that actually does a good job of highlighting my point that you got to pay attention to what other people are writing for your work. So, like safety inspections, that statement, inspections should be conducted by the project superintendent, seems pretty straightforward. But what if the superintendent's not on site? Who else is going to be there? So we wanted them to say, or the project manager, because at this time we knew one of those two are going to be on site all the time. So we're giving ourselves flexibility in how to meet compliance with what we're saying we're going to do. Oof, a lot of info. All right. I think we're, any other questions on the risk around this process?
Yes, I have a question. Are you suggesting that as a small organization, we should consider hiring a consultant?
I do suggest for specialized stuff that there's value in hiring consultants to at least do the first one for you, or to develop. If you're looking, if you know you have a lot of projects coming up, they're going to need a lead compliance plan. Hire somebody to develop the first one, and then maybe you can take that one and modify it going forward for future projects. Because there's a lot of submittals like that have kind of a technical format and knowledge and language. Sometimes it's right, like there's only certified people who can actually develop these things. But other times it's just having, if you do it every day, you know how to do it efficiently. So they, for a couple $100, they might kick you out a plan and have it to you tomorrow, where it would take you 4 days to research it and start from scratch and draft it. The other area where I'm not saying I suggest it, but to consider is if you're really first getting into bigger projects, but you don't feel you have enough work to have like that full-time project manager or project administrator, to do a part-time role or a consulting type role that allows you to flex, right? So you aren't stuck with a salary all year when you only have one of these projects and you're not sure that you're going to get another one. So it just reduces your exposure on your fixed cost that way. I don't suggest to hire a consultant just for the sake of hiring somebody who knows how to do submittals, right? Make sure it works for your business model and your financials. That makes sense? At least what I was trying to suggest.
I just think it'll make, it a whole lot easier for a smaller company to move forward and to grow.
Yeah, I do find that using somebody who it's expensive to hire consultants from maybe like an hourly rate or whatever their fees are, but you may gain in their efficiencies because they do it all the time. But what I do really advocate for is to use it to teach yourself and to teach your team, so you can absorb some of that work. Because maybe you have staffing that has the bandwidth to do something, but not the knowledge. So if you can bring in somebody to help them get that knowledge on the first one, now you're good, right? You don't need to keep spending the money on that person, on that expert, because you have shared that knowledge and trained your people on how to do it. Good examples on that. I mean, like Edward, you'd said you got some help on doing the detailing and drafting for this project you're working on. Are you
Yeah,
gonna
actually, no, well, the whole submittal process, in its entirety, I was given a person that would just walk me through
okay?
what I was supposed to do as far as the submittal process was concerned on my end,
Okay.
the part that I was supposed to do.
Okay, and that's one of their staff helping you.
Yes.
Yeah, and so I definitely I suggest going that route before you hire somebody, because if you can get it for free, right, right? Why wouldn't you? But
Yeah, because it was brand new to me,
right.
and I had no idea. So I kind of mentioned that, and the guy, he suggested to me a person that would be happy to help me.
Mhm.
Just walk me through, explained to me my role, what I was supposed to do. And it turned out it's not as hard. I know it's a little intimidating, you know,
Right.
and it is a lot. I'm not gonna lie. But once you get used to the process of what they want, you have to know exactly what they want from you specifically.
Yep.
And just submit it to them. That's, you know, submittal. That's the name of the
Yeah.
game. So give it to them. They'll reply to you with, you know, as in regards to what you sent them, and they'll let you know if it's
Yep.
a yes or no, whatever, and then you just go from there. So it's not
Yeah.
too bad. And like I said earlier, I've only been doing this for this part anyway for around 2 weeks. So I'm getting used to the process. I've been doing a little bit every day. And
Yep.
once you get it down, it's not as hard as it may seem. You know, as you presented it, honestly, it's pretty similar to what I've been doing.
Cool.
So
Yeah.
I understand, you know, a little bit more now. You know, you touched on a couple of things that I didn't know, so that actually helped me a lot.
Good deal. Yeah. So Ty, maybe the better way for me to phrase it is I do recommend finding ways to get help to learn and to ramp up into this process.
Would you consider maybe some overseas source?
Yeah. There's challenges with there can be communication challenges there, but time zone and sometimes language. And the other, it depends on what the work is, right? So if it's stuff like the lead compliance plan that I was showing, like this, the rules here are specific to the state of California. So in that scenario, if you go for an affordable outsource, they can look up the rules and write the plan, but it may take a couple attempts to get it to the point that this firm would get it in one go, because they do it very specific to this scenario all the time. So I definitely say that there's good value in going that route. Stuff like scheduling and schedule updates. Most people can communicate how they want to do work and sequence and durations and stuff, but that doesn't mean you can sit down at a computer and open up a sophisticated CPM program and knock out a schedule in a few minutes, right? But that outsource can take your handwritten notes and knock it out for you, send it back and say, how's this look? And then you say, cool, make these changes and you're done. And it can be effective and efficient and affordable. Have you tried that outsourcing?
Yeah, actually, I looked into bringing on a civil engineer,
Okay.
which here in the U.S. a civil engineer costs you about $200 an hour. I think he's in Pakistan. I think in Pakistan, a crew in Pakistan, a firm in Pakistan. I think their hourly rate is like $22 to $25 an hour.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely can be a good business decision. And just be aware that, but make sure that for that $25 an hour, you get something that you can, that you're comfortable with passing on as for whatever the product is, to say this is right. So making sure they understand local codes and regulations and all that kind of stuff. So just have a quality control process in place, I guess is what I'm saying. And that applies to anything you outsource. Like I showed with that lead compliance plan, don't trust it's right without looking through it yourself and being sure it's right. And that can be a bit of a tedious process too, because you may go back to, right, if you got a shop drawing for this project, you're going to go back and look at their list of requirements and say, okay, does it have all the dimensions? Does it have, are we submitting a sufficient number of samples, that kind of stuff? I think I've covered this one pretty well. No idea where to start. What do I do? That's kind of just what we were talking about. Oh, I do want to show this. So if you, as far as material and product data, vendors these days, especially larger ones, for building products, are often making it pretty easy to get a submittal together. So this, I don't even know what this is. It looks like metal framing. It's something I kind of Googled around for online shop drawings. So, you have a new project, you need to submit shop drawings. They actually have an online system here. You go through, put in your details for the materials that are, so looks like in this scenario, you probably have plans that have dimensions, right, for metal framing, 4-inch framing, 20 gauge. And boom, they're saying, okay, here's your product data. So I just did a submittal in 20 seconds, right? So I do suggest working with vendors that make this process simple if you can, even if it costs a little bit more for the product, run the dollars, but 30 seconds of that and you have what you need versus 12 phone calls to somebody who just won't get it to you, right? So kind of track your performance with your vendors over time and find the ones that are responsive and know what they're doing and stay on top of changes for designs and new products. But here's a great sample of what this is: a product data submittal, right? You take this, you put your cover sheet on it. Do I have a cover sheet? So here's my cover sheet. Specification, you'll say metal framing. Here's the supplier. I'm saying I certified that I've reviewed it and it meets specs. So don't be so intimidated to think all this stuff takes hours. You got to find the resources and make it efficient for you. All right, 10 minutes left. I think I'm out of stuff to say. Who's got questions, thoughts, information they'd like? So my next session is intended to be focused on kind of site visits, and I'm going to focus on pre-construction and bidding site visits as well as kind of project site visits. We got a 3-hour window. I don't know that all that covers 3 hours. So if there's stuff you guys would like me to revisit or stuff that we haven't talked about at all, if I can fit it in, I will. You have any feedback on that?
Well, I just wanted to say that there's if we're short of talent in terms of the administrative portion, there's a lot of talent can be found on Upwork. For instance, like estimators, civil engineers, and project managers.
Yep.
Some great talent on that site.
You might even see me on there if you look for California construction management stuff.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So yeah, there are a lot of good resources right there. Anything back on previous stuff we talked about, scheduling?
I had a quick question.
Yeah, go for it.
So I think it was one of the earlier slides, maybe like 15 or 16. You mentioned something about an owner delaying the project,
right,
and putting that information somewhere. I run into this, I would say, pretty often, where I don't have any controls in place for working with owners and making sure that they stick to a schedule. And ultimately, they expect us to stick to the schedule, which is not, I don't know, doesn't seem very reasonable to me. So I was trying to think of a way that, and I just had completely missed that slide of how, one, we can track things like that and keep both owners and subcontractors accountable? And then two, how do we actually enforce that?
Right. A couple different parts there. The starting point is how your contract is structured and related to timelines. And so if as a prime, if you're going to sign a contract that says I have 50 days to complete this, usually there's going to be some language in there related to delays and who causes the delay and that kind of stuff. And on residential stuff, it doesn't always get that sophisticated. But if you want your contracts to have wording in there saying, okay, I do have 50 days to do this, but there's wording that recognizes the owner can be responsible for delays just as much as the contractor can. And with your subcontractors, you want to kind of have similar language. I look at it from a fairness aspect. If you're asking your prime contract with the owner to have, both responsibilities for delays addressed, your delay versus theirs, it's fair to do that with your subcontractor. You can't just make it one way. Hey, sub, if there's a delay, it's your fault if it's related to your work because you may delay them, right? Or the owner may delay them through you. So you want to try and get something in the contract that allows you to address that. Commercial and public work stuff are always going to have substantial delay and time of completion sections in their specifications that do address it. So you get the contract, then if you're going to have a dispute over time, you have to know what the original plan was, right? So that goes back to your schedule. Hopefully you're preparing some form of schedule. Doesn't, Excel, CPM schedule, if you use a project management software, whatever it is, you prepared a baseline that includes some, if you're talking about submittal specifically, includes that duration. So you agree that the owner's got 10 days to review color samples or tile layout or something like that. So you agree on that in your baseline schedule. Your subs are included in that. So you've got the baseline schedule, and then you got to track it, right? So you have your submittal log. This is kind of an internal document for you saying, I say internal, you'll share it with the owner. Like it's a multifunctional for both you, the contractor and the owner. But it's going to say, I submitted paint samples on November 1st. They returned it on November 2nd. Cool, they beat the 10 days, there's no problem there. But if you submit it November 1st and you're on November 11th, they're not done, well, it's an email or a phone call. Email's good because it's a record saying, knock, knock, what's up with this review? Beware, it's going to hold us up if I don't know what color I'm going to paint, because I'm going to paint in 2 days. So you kind of put them on notice with that. And the method of that notice is going to go back to how your contract reads on responsibility for delays and stuff. And then same thing with the sub. If they owe you a submittal for color and they're supposed to be there in a day, but it's going to take 10 days to get it in and reviewed, you need to put them on notice saying, hey guys, we're ready for you. You've been asking for the submittal. We don't have it. Don't forget the owner's got 10 days to review it. So don't expect to start painting in 2 days if they decide to take their full 10. So it's kind of establishing that the method for documenting and resolving those delays. It's having the schedule in place to do it, and it's actually tracking how things play out. And the tracking is most often, and it is very often an area that I see failure, right? It's not having a log of submittals because it does take 2 minutes to sit down at the computer and fire it up and put this information in. And if you don't do it, it's all good until it's not. Right? But if you do, if you get up in court, it's super easy to say, hey guys, here was my contract, here was the schedule, here's a submittal log saying when I turned it in, here's the multiple emails to the owner saying, hey, you're late, what's up? this delay is not my fault because I couldn't proceed until they held up their end of the bargain, and they didn't. So it's some people view it as kind of maybe an aggressive way to manage work, but what it's really doing is protecting everybody's liability, and you want to do it in a cooperative fashion to really make sure everybody understands that you're after your interest, the owner's interest, and the sub's interest. Does that help?
Yeah, that was very clear. Thank you.
Cool. And that applies to not just submittals. I mean, that's just general. That's the world of delay and claim management. The goal is to prevent it, right? But you have to have the foundation in place to know how all that stuff is going to be managed. And it starts with having a contract that gives tools to manage it. All right. Well, I think we are up at the end of our timeline here. I appreciate everybody's participation today. It was good to have the conversations. I hope. I know it's a lot of info. Hope it brings good value. The session is recorded, and it will be available on Suzanne's webpage as well as all the other ones. So if you don't have access to that or anything, reach out to her and she'll make sure that she has it. And I don't remember if I'm the next session or not. I think I'm in October, but I will see you guys for site visits and site management. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep. Everybody enjoy your weekend. Bye.
You as well. Everybody else.
Yep.
Enjoy the weekend.
Have a good weekend, everyone.